Kia ora, g'day, welcome back. Well, let's jump back into part 2 of this reaction.
They landed under heavy fire. Air Force Combat Controller Technical Sergeant John A. Chapman, 24 hours into the worst night of his life, charged a bunker, killed 2 fighters inside and took rounds himself. The SEALs, believing him also dead, withdrew under fire down the side of the mountain. Chapman was not dead. Predator drone footage reviewed years later would show Chapman survived his initial wounds, that he kept fighting alone in his bunker for more than an hour, that he engaged...
Man, it's crazy just hearing that video footage, drone footage that was reviewed years later. Why did it take so long for that footage to come out or to be shown in regards to the actions that John Chapman did? From what I understand, based on some of the comments that I've read in one of my reactions to Britt Slimbinski, people in there have said that him and his Navy SEALs teams tried to bury the actions that John Chapman did. And so that's, I think people have shared, that's what's been the more hurtful part. But crazy if that's what's taken place. But curious, why would it take years for that sort of drone footage to come out, especially of actions of what you can see clearly take place in that footage?
Multiple enemy positions before he was finally killed. In 2018, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. But on the morning of the 4th of March, nobody on the American side knew any of
Should have been given 2, 2 Medals of Honor.
that. What they knew was 2 Americans were down somewhere on that peak and a quick reaction force was already inbound. The quick reaction force was 19 Army Rangers and a 3-man Air Force Special Tactics team, Captain Nate Self in command. 2 Chinooks, call signs Razor 01 and Razor 02. They had been told a downed SEAL needed extraction. They had not been told the peak was now occupied by a dug-in enemy company. Razor 01 went in first. As it flared to land, a rocket-propelled grenade hit the right engine. Small arms fire chewed through the cabin. The helicopter slammed into the snow. 3 Rangers, Private First Class Matthew Commons, Sergeant Bradley Crowes, and Specialist Mark Anderson were killed in the first seconds. The survivors fought clear of the wreck and took cover in a small depression on the slope. This is the moment Hagenbeck would later put a name to. This is the moment the Australians had been waiting for. Now, hold up. Before we get into the next 18 hours, the part the Pentagon does not put in the briefing slides, subscribe if you are not already, because the rest of this story, what one Australian sergeant did with 1 rifle and 1 radio against a mountain full of Al-Qaeda, is the kind of military history most channels will not touch. Hit the button.
It's crazy. Why would most channels not want to touch it?
Let us keep going. Across the valley on a separate ridge, an Australian SAS patrol had been watching the entire Takur Ghar disaster unfold through their scopes. From the first RPG hitting Razor,
Probably wondering why they bothered sending intelligence back in the first place if it wasn't going to be listened to. Mad, but it's out of their control. They went out, did their job, got intelligence, sent it back in terms of the landing zones. Those are already marked with mortars to go on there. The enemy insurgents aren't in the actual village. They're up in the ridgelines and in the mountains already. And the numbers that you're anticipating or that you've predicted are likely in that area is not 1 to 200 or whatever. It's more like 700 to 1,000 plus. And just ignored.
Razor 03 to the SEALs slipping off the ramp, to Razor 01 going down in the snow. They had been on that ridge for 10 days at this point. They had built a picture of every enemy position around the peak. They had survived weather that, as one Queensland trooper later put it on Australian national television, wore off after about 5 minutes once the novelty of seeing snow for the first time disappeared. They were carrying a radio with a direct satellite link back to Coalition Command at Bagram. They had a sniper rifle, they had eyes on. and they had the ability to talk aircraft onto the targets that were about to kill 24 young Americans. What they did next, over the next 18 hours, is what the Australian Distinguished Service Cross Citation and the US Silver Star Citation would later describe in clinical, declassified language. The patrol identified the Al-Qaeda elements moving toward the trapped rangers on the slope below the peak. They marked positions, and they began calling in airstrikes from more than 1,000 meters away, with the kind of precision you can only deliver when you have been staring at the same ground for a week and a half. Now, this is the part where you remember what the Australians had been telling the Americans for months. They were not a kicking indoors unit. They were not, as one SAS veteran put it in Time magazine, bodybuilder types full of steroids running off adrenaline. They were patient, they were quiet, they could lie on a freezing ridge with a scope and a radio for 10 days, eating cold rations, and then when the moment came, turn that 10 days of watching into precision steel from 20,000 feet. For 18 hours straight, the Australians on that ridge did exactly that. When Al-Qaeda fighters moved to flank the...
I just think it's awesome as I'm listening to this. The Aussie patrol, I think he said sergeant, so I would probably know who the person is from around that time because they would have likely still been in the unit by the time I got there eventually. I may not have known them well, but I probably would know them by name. But this just wasn't something that that the guys spoke about. Like it wasn't one of those. It wasn't a story that was going through the different squadrons or the troops or anything like that within the regiment. At least not that I'm aware of. And I guess probably just to a degree, I think a testament just to the quiet professionalism aspect of operators within the unit. Like I'm not surprised that I didn't know about the Australians' part in this particular piece of Anaconda until being asked about it by a kind supporter over in Australia. So it's pretty awesome to me to be watching this, thinking of now got my head in my head and picturing all these different, but mostly from one squadron, but a couple from 2 and 3 squadron, picturing these senior heads that would have been in Afghanistan during that period of time and or could have been in Afghanistan during that period of time, and wondering, oh, was it them? Was it him and his patrol? But pretty cool that, you know, I think I was talking in a live not that long ago about it just wasn't one of those things that you sit around. I think people think that guys in the unit sit around and talk about the different jobs that they've been on. Yeah, maybe from time to time, but I never really encountered that or saw that, even with guys that were senior to me that had been on a whole bunch of other jobs. It wasn't something that they would try to put in a new guy's face like me when I was a new fellow. It wasn't something that they'd try to throw in my face or anybody's face or anything like that. If there was conversation around some of their deployments, it was more around lessons learnt and how to prep and what to take and maybe what not to take and what to have on standby in case, bits and pieces of whether it's personal equipment but also operational equipment and how to protect things, just on lessons learned. So one that stands out to me really clearly is when I was doing my patrol medics course, and I think I've spoken about this before, but maybe not in this way. And one of the guys who was patrol medic who was in Afghanistan at the time, and I think was it 2001 or 2002? I don't know if it was part of Anaconda, but one of the guys, so during my patrol medics course, they brought in obviously some of the badged operators that were there that were medics at the time in Afghanistan in the freezing cold, and they worked on Andy Russell. I'm pretty sure that was the sergeant's name that lost his life over in Afghanistan, early stages before the global war on terror kicked off. I never knew Andy, but he had a really awesome reputation from what I could gather from guys here in the unit. Anyway, an IED, I think, is what hit their vehicle, blew them out of the vehicle. The guys that were trained as a patrol medic in particular went up, started, trying to manage him and stop the bleeding and all that sort of stuff. They put a line in, like an IV line, and they said it started to freeze. So they did everything that they could in terms of trying to keep the bags warm, keeping the guys holding the line, the line that you've got to go in with the fluid joining, so it wouldn't freeze up and stop the fluids and all that sort of thing from going in, etc. So pretty horrendous scene for the guys, and the guys spoke really well as they shared that information with us. But it was that sort of stuff in terms of lessons learned, and this is what we'd do now and carrying. And so, it became a thing to carry those little quick, I don't know if they're called quick release, but little heat packs. Like you could just crack them open, and then, if we needed to, we would then have those on standby and added stuff. So it was those sort of conversations. I never heard any of the guys beating their chest about it. Don't get me wrong, there may have been some guys, and maybe they did just in their own time with smaller groups and that sort of thing. But, there's typically lots going on in the day, even in training, like as part of preparation and getting ready. And then you mix, with training and prep and all that sort of stuff. And some of that work is high risk. And so you focus on that. And so whilst you're doing that, mixed in amongst that is, the banter and getting cheeky to each other and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, sorry, I digress, but that's just a thought that popped into my head, as well as being, thinking it's pretty awesome that a video like this has been done on some of the actions of the guys. It'd be great to know who the guys are. Surely they're out by now. Maybe one day I could meet with them and interview them and get their thoughts and that sort of thing, and get some of the experiences of what actually happened from their perspective.
Rangers from the north, the Australians called fast air onto the route. When mortar teams tried to reposition, the Australians killed them with directed bombs. When enemy elements tried to push uphill to finish the survivors of Razor 01, the airstrikes broke them. 500-pound bombs were landing inside 100 meters of friendly forces. The Rangers held the position because nobody on that mountain could move without dying. Up to 300 Al-Qaeda fighters were later estimated to have been killed by the airstrikes those Australians called in. Hagenbeck, the 3-star American general in command of the entire operation, later said on Australian television about the Australian signaller working the radios that day that he went into the hottest landing zone in the valley.
Wow. I'm just starting to think, is this Jock Wallace? Is like the signalman is part of the patrol? Like, again, I don't know if Jock, like, I know who Jock is, but he wouldn't know me. He was already there attached to the regiment before I got there, and then ended up going to 1 squadron. But I'd like just hearing that was in the hottest part of the LZ. I can't help but think it's Jock. Anyway.
The Australian SAS soldier there was instrumental because he had direct communications right back to us at Bagram, and he could, in essence, talk us through what was happening on the ground. When the rescue helicopters finally came in after dark on the 4th of March to pull the survivors of Razor 01 off the mountain, every man of the 24 who walked down alive owed that flight to people they had never met. Hergenbeck put it plainer in his own words. He said, "I would not have wanted to do that operation without the Australian SAS folks on that ridgeline."
That's pretty cool, eh? Let me just pause that there. I would not have wanted to do that operation without the Australian SAS folks on that ridgeline. Lieutenant General Paul T. So what it's got there is the person who's quoted that. That's high praise. I mean, maybe if they had have listened, maybe not potentially this guy, but whoever the higher-ups were that made the decisions, that received intelligence from the regiment patrol that was there for the last 10 days, doing their job, gathering intelligence for you. Like, that's one of the primary roles of the unit, is probably contrary to maybe popular belief. The job isn't to go out there and to get into as many contacts as you can. You're trying to avoid that, get the information, if you can, disrupt, destroy, all that sort of stuff, get in, get out, and hopefully the enemy is none the wiser. But man, to get all that information and send it back, and for it to be, by the sounds of things, disregarded, who are those decision makers like that made that had the authority to go, yeah, no, we went. Thanks, but no thanks.
To do that operation without the Australian SAS folks on that ridgeline. I mean, they made it happen that day. That is an American 3-star general about foreign soldiers, on camera, on the record. Operation Anaconda officially dragged on for another 2 weeks. There were more sweeps, there were thermobaric bombs dropped into caves for the first time in combat. But the major fighting was over. The toll, 8 Americans dead, 70 plus wounded, somewhere between 200 and 800 Al-Qaeda fighters killed, depending on who is counting. A coalition force that walked in thinking the enemy was on the valley.
Depending on who is counting and who's listening, if the Australian media were listening to it, they'd probably be saying 300 farmers, and then be looking to try to charge those lads with war crimes. Like twats.
Floor walked out knowing the enemy had been on the ridges the whole time. And the Australians. In July 2002, Lieutenant Colonel Rowan Tink, the commander of Task Force 64, was awarded the United States Bronze Star at Bagram. The man who pinned it on him was Hagenbeck. Tink's name became public. Most of the other names from that valley never did. One Sergeant Patrol Commander, the man who actually called in those airstrikes, whose identity remains classified by the Australian government to this day, was awarded both the Australian Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest gallantry award in the Australian honours system, and the United States Silver Star.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I didn't see, or mind you, probably wasn't too many times we were kicking around, and maybe aside from Anzac Day, and yeah. But I was just thinking, I didn't see anybody with a, like, what would have stuck out to me, like a Silver Star from the US. But that's awesome. Let me just go back and just hear Tink. I don't know that name. Is that an American guy who was overseeing Task Force 64 from the Americans' perspective? I don't know the name Tink in the Australian regiment anyway. Apologies if he is from the Australian regiment. And then understandable with this person who they said whose identity has been kept quiet. Man, I'd love to know who it is. I'd love to catch up with them and have a chat and and just hear from them. So again, I don't know if it's Jock Wallace. Maybe what Jock was involved in might have been something else, because this guy, the narrator's saying a SAS patrol commander, patrol sergeant. I don't know that Jock was a sergeant for one, and pretty sure he wasn't. He was a SIG. He was part of 152. Pretty sure he wasn't the patrol commander for one of the teams out on the ground.
Did both the Australian Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest gallantry award in the Australian honours system, and the United States Silver Star. He is one of a very small number of foreign nationals to hold both. He still does not have a face. Tommy Franks, the 4-star Australian American general.
I was just saying, I bet. And he's saying he still does not have a face. He probably is quite happy with leaving it that way as well. So I will probably never get to meet the guy. Come on, man.
General who commanded CENTCOM and the entire war, later said this on the record in an interview with the Australian Army Journal. He said, "The Australian SAS were exceptionally good at this task. They possess some incredible tactical skills, and sniping is not the least of these. The Australians conducted several interdiction operations that were among the most highly effective actions that we conducted in Afghanistan." There's one more part of this story.
It's cool. High praise once again. But I think, I think the US say the same things about other coalition forces. Part of that, obviously, because it's true, and the other part to keep. Well, in my opinion, I think what they're saying is true. It's genuine. It's not just for appearance's sake. Is where I was going with that. And then the second part, aside from it being true and genuine, is that it's the relationship there. Like, you don't go and join a fight with another country if you don't. If you're not aligned in a lot of ways and supportive of the cause, at least in terms of the information that you receive anyway, and then looking to go in there. What happens during and after, maybe a little disappointing at the end. Watching this and then hearing the amount of intelligence, which seems like it was disregarded, that part is disappointing. That the Americans what sounds like the Americans disregarded that intel that came in from this particular patrol. But also that I'd like to think that the headquarters for the Australian regiment lads that are out on the ground are part of Task Force 64 would have been pushing very hard, or as hard as they could, to make the Americans aware. But even then, when you're a superpower and you're a general and you're a whatever else, and you're another country that's a coalition support helping the main effort, US being the main effort, you're going to make the decisions, pull the trigger, and either listen to information that comes in, I would assume, and or in this case, seems like they were like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
4 days into Anaconda, before the Battle of Takur, but after the operation had already begun to come apart, a different Australian SAS patrol working from a separate ridge spotted a group of figures moving through the high ground. They were dressed in Russian pattern camouflage. They wore black balaclavas. They carried weapons more advanced than what the average insurgent was carrying. And they appeared to be escorting an older man in white robes, carrying a cane, being moved away from the fight. The Australians called in an airstrike from more than 1,200 meters away. US intelligence initially believed the older man was Osama bin Laden. That was later revised to Ayman al-Zawahiri, his second in command. Whether the strike killed anyone of significance is still disputed. What is not disputed is what happened to the Australian relationship with US Special Operations from that day forward. The same Australian intelligence officer who had told Time that the Americans could not comprehend Australian capability also told them what changed after that strike. He said it was not until after certain high-tempo combat engagements during Anaconda that we kind of worked out that we can do better than this. Translation. From that day forward, the Australian SAS were not on blocking duty. They were at the planning table for senior Al-Qaeda targeting operations. They would deploy back to Afghanistan in rotation through 2014.
Wow, look at that. It's cool that it's got this little chart depiction here. Return, 24 Rangers saved, turning points, Mark Donaldson VC, Ben Robert Smith VC. What else is it going to show here?
They would, before that war ended...
Oh, what's this guy's name? Kieran? I need to find out more about his story too.
To Afghanistan in rotation through 2014. They would, before that war ended, produce 2 Victoria Cross recipients. Trooper Mark Donaldson in 2009, Corporal Ben Robert Smith in 2011. The first Australian Victoria Crosses since Vietnam. The Special Operations Command Battle Honour for Afghanistan was officially announced in March.
Well, I think they missed that third guy. The one where it showed the footage there, because that was neither Dono or RS. Bloody hell, I'm going to butcher his name. I don't know if it's Kieran or Keegan. Not Keegan. It's Matthew Locke's son. Rest in peace to Matty. Yeah, but anyway, if somebody knows who the other Australian guy is that was there in the video marching up, I'm pretty sure he got his during the Global War on Terror as well. So technically, there's 3 Victoria Cross recipients during the GWAT.
2013. Australia's first battle honour since Vietnam. All of it traces back to a freezing ridge above the Shahi Kot, where 6 men nobody in the American chain of command had wanted to listen to for the first 4 months of the war ended up being the only thing keeping 24 Rangers alive.
Wow. Imagine that. I wonder if, well, they'll probably never watch a video like this. People may find it hard to believe that something like this has taken place, maybe. But I don't, now that I've seen this. Like I said, I hadn't heard about it. It wasn't something that was being spoken about when I was in the regiment in Australia. Obviously, this happened while I was on, well, he says here 2002, so I would have been on cycle that year along with the guys, my cohort that I was with. I did mention that we were hearing stories of contacts and stuff that were happening in various ways in which either members from the unit or regiment were either involved in or supporting. And yeah, just seeing this now and hearing this and the way it's been put together, pretty cool. I've subscribed to this channel too, so yeah, I think there's probably some other good stuff in here which would be worth watching, not just on Australian stuff, but I assume they've probably got other stories on other events.
Hagenbeck said it on television. Frank said it in print. The citations said it in the careful, antiseptic language.
Is this? This is probably, no, it's probably got nothing to do with it. Just like half the pictures and stuff they've shown.
Which of military awards. And the Pentagon for the next decade mostly said nothing at all because the lessons of Takur Gar were uncomfortable in the way real lessons always are.
That's rubbish, eh? That's one of the good things I found about the regiment, is that talking about those lessons, like I shared with rest in peace to Andy Russell and the guys performing the medical trauma support and care to try to, get him through. Sadly, he passed away. But the lessons that they learned, would have been hard lessons. People might look at it and go, oh, wouldn't you have thought that could be something that could happen? Like freezing cold temperatures. Yeah, maybe it was, but it definitely wasn't until listening to the guys, till that tragedy happened, that they're now in it and then, improvising on the spot, doing everything that they could. The guys were describing that they chuck the bags under their jackets, to have it close to their body to get body temperature and stuff, or body heat onto them. And then they were holding, same deal with the lines. They were holding the lines, just gathering around and wrapping it as much as they could to just try to keep the whole line as warm as they could. Again, where they needed to, stuffing that underneath, trying to have warm parts wrapped around where the blink and TKVO has gone in, or that to keep vein open, bung has gone in to then get the line in there. Like, guys are doing everything that they could, improvising on the spot, which is not surprising. But yeah, they spoke about some of those lessons after, and as a result, during my patrol medics course, even though we went into Iraq in the summer, we were still prepared and had things in location that we had packed and that I'd packed and taken with my gear, just in case the weather did turn to custard, or things went bad, or we were going to be left out there longer than what was originally planned, etc. So yeah, without those lessons, without those types of conversations, like, it's hard to imagine how you can improve. And so they're talking about here, if the Pentagon's not talking about them, if leadership from Anaconda, who made the decision, or those who made the decisions to ignore the intel that was coming from the Australian patrol, or the Australian SASR patrol, hopefully they've learned from that. Hopefully this sort of stuff actually gets reviewed, and they are committed to, dare I say, continuous improvement, because lives are on the line. And gratefully, the Aussie patrol was able to put down so much effective enemy fire. Was able to put down so much effective fire onto enemy positions and advancing enemy towards the friendlies, or towards those rangers, the QRF, that it's the remaining survivors got out of there, alive, not unscathed, but alive. Obviously, thanks to John Chapman's actions too, like all of this part with regards to that Roberts Ridge, etc. And then it's pretty cool to hear how the Australian patrol, albeit from a distance, played a critical role in helping those that came in on the QRF chopper, etc., and the remaining SEAL team members get off that ridge alive. Oh, come on.
That high technology is not all that you can't replace eyes on the ground with a thermal camera, that sometimes the people who know the most about the battlefield are the ones nobody is asking, and that some battles aren't won by the largest force on the field. They're won by 6 quiet men with a radio, watching the wind, counting the bodies, waiting to be useful. The peak is still called Roberts Ridge. The valley is still called the Place of the King. The Al-Qaeda fighters who survived that mountain spent the rest of the war telling each other about the strikes that came out of the snow without warning. The strikes that arrived before the sound of the aircraft did. If you want to see what came next for that same regiment, the actions that earned the first Australian Victoria Crosses since Vietnam, the operations of Mark Donaldson and Ben Roberts Smith in the valleys further south. That story is on screen now. The mountain is still there.
We'll pause it. All right, we'll pause that there on that screen. I didn't know that, so I'll have to go and have a look at that as well, with Mark Donaldson and Ben Roberts Smith VC. I wonder if they've got the third Australian guy. Maybe I'll have a look for that first, because I've done a couple of reactions to Dono and RS. I probably need to. I don't know that I finished the one with Dono, actually. So yeah, got plenty of reactions to do. But that's cool. I enjoyed watching that. So thank you very much to the gentleman over there in Australia sending me through the link, asking me if I knew about this or heard about this. Like I said, I hadn't heard about it, not specifically, not in this detail. Obviously, it's part of the whole Roberts Ridge and Anaconda and everything. So very, very cool to hear. Sad also to hear in terms of the intel that they had been gathering was disregarded. But anyway, hopefully live and learn and do better. And we'll see what's next in terms of the reactions. So as always, thank you very much for your time and support. And with that, again, the message is always the same. Any challenges, difficulties, trials you may be going through, man, just keep turning up, keep staying in the fight, put one foot in front of the other, and take one day at a time. Be kinder to yourself. It is okay to not be okay, and it is okay to ask for help if you need to. So, do that if you have to. Know that the sun will shine again, that better days are always closer than you and I think, and there is a light at the end of that tunnel. And if you and I want things to get better, we just have to want them to get better. That's been my experience. If you don't, it can make it a heck of a lot harder, and things can drag on in a pretty lonely, miserable space longer than they need to. So keep fighting and stick at it. As always, go always a little further. Remember, who dares wins and who cares wins. And until the next video, there is a big mana wave coming from me to you, filled with my aroha, respect, appreciation, and gratitude for you all.